Hannah Collins dialed 911 at exactly 3:02 a.m., and within minutes, she vanished from her own home without a trace. What police later found hidden in her attic would connect her to Marissa Dale, a teenager who disappeared 20 years earlier. Now, as investigators uncover chilling clues and a decades-old pattern, they begin to realize that Hannah's case is just one thread in a web spun by someone who has been hiding in plain sight all along. On a cold January night in the small, wooded town of Pinebrook, emergency dispatch received a chilling call that would spark one of the most mysterious missing persons cases in the region's history. It was just after 3 in the morning when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to 24-year-old Hannah Collins, a quiet woman who had moved into her late aunt's house just 2 months prior. The dispatcher noted that her voice was trembling, and she was clearly frightened. She said she heard footsteps upstairs, slow and deliberate, but she lived alone. There was no one else who should have been in the house. She told the dispatcher she had checked all the doors earlier in the night, made sure they were locked, and hadn't left any windows open. She hadn't invited anyone over. According to the call log, she tried to remain calm, whispering that she was hiding in the downstairs coat closet. The line remained open as the dispatcher asked her to stay put and assured her that officers were on their way. But just as the dispatcher began asking questions, "What do the footsteps sound like? Do you recognize them?" the call suddenly cut off. No screaming, no struggle, just silence, followed by a dead line. The call was traced to a house on Oak Ridge Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac tucked at the edge of Pinebrook's thick forest boundary. Officers were dispatched immediately. The streets were empty, the neighborhood still asleep. By 3:12 a.m., police arrived at the scene. The house was modest, 2 stories, old brick, slightly worn down but well-maintained. The porch light was on, and the front door stood slightly ajar. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass or broken locks. One officer called out into the home, announcing their presence, but there was no answer. Inside, the living room was eerily still. The TV was off, but a floor lamp cast a warm glow across the furniture. A mug of half-finished tea sat on the coffee table. Hannah's phone was found face down on the floor near the bottom of the stairs. Her wallet and keys were in a dish by the door. Her coat was hanging on the rack next to the closet she had mentioned on the phone. Everything seemed to be in its place, except Hannah. They searched the house room by room. Upstairs, the bedroom light was on, the bed unmade, a book open on the nightstand. The bathroom door was wide open, steam still clinging to the mirror, as if someone had taken a shower not long before. The officers called for backup and initiated a full sweep of the property. They searched the basement, attic, closets, underbeds, and even the backyard. But there was no sign of Hannah anywhere. There were no muddy footprints, no scattered belongings, no overturned furniture. It looked as if she had simply vanished. What troubled the officers most was the quiet. For a house that supposedly had someone walking around upstairs just 15 minutes earlier, it was completely silent. There was no back door left open, no broken window, no sign that anyone had left the house in a hurry. It felt as though she had been swallowed by the walls. The house was sealed off, and a forensic team arrived by dawn. They took samples, dusted, for prints, and began cataloging the scene. Nothing pointed to a break-in or struggle. Hannah's shoes were by the door. Her purse was on the dining table. There was no blood, no signs of violence, and nothing out of the ordinary, at least not at first glance. When the news broke later that morning, the town was stunned. Pinebrook was a quiet place, known more for its farmers' markets and hiking trails than for violent crime. Hannah's disappearance was the kind of thing people only heard about on true crime podcasts, not something that happened just down the road. The house on Oak Ridge Lane became the center of media attention. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood asking questions no one could answer. Detectives canvassed the area, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything strange during the night. A few neighbors mentioned hearing a dog bark around 3 a.m., but no one reported seeing anyone enter or leave Hannah's house. Security cameras on the nearby street corner had a limited view and showed no cars arriving or departing from the area between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. It was as if time stood still for that hour, and Hannah had disappeared in the space between seconds. Her friends and family were brought in for questioning. They described Hannah as quiet but kind, someone who kept to herself but wasn't unfriendly. She had recently moved to Pinebrook after inheriting her aunt's home, a house she hadn't visited in years. According to her cousin, Hannah had planned to stay in Pinebrook for a year while figuring out her next steps in life. She worked remotely for a publishing company, didn't party, didn't date much, and didn't have any known enemies. No stalkers, no threats, no history of mental illness. Detectives dug into her digital life. They found social media accounts that were rarely used, old emails and work correspondence that all seemed ordinary. Nothing pointed to any reason why someone would want to harm or take her. She hadn't sent any alarming messages or expressed any fear to anyone close to her. At least not publicly, but something didn't sit right with the lead investigator. The timing of the call, the nature of the fear in her voice, and the complete lack of physical evidence suggested something far more disturbing. It wasn't just that Hannah was missing. It was how thoroughly she had disappeared. In most missing persons cases, there's at least a thread to follow, a clue, a mistake. But in Hannah's case, there was nothing. The closet where she said she was hiding showed no signs of struggle. The coat inside was still hanging neatly. Her phone had stopped recording mid-call, but the signal had remained active until officers arrived, suggesting it wasn't damaged, just abandoned. What kind of fear makes someone drop their phone and vanish without a trace? Over the next 24 hours, police dogs were brought in, search teams combed the woods behind the property, and drones scanned the area from above. Still, no leads, no footprints, no scent trail. It was as though Pinebrook itself had closed in around Hannah and erased her. By the end of the second day, investigators had more questions than answers. What had she heard? Who or what had been in the house with her? And how could someone disappear from a locked home without leaving behind a single clue? What had started as a strange 3 a.m. phone call was now a full-scale mystery, one that would grow darker with every new discovery. The search for Hannah Collins continued in the days after her disappearance, but progress was slow and frustrating. The house on Oak Ridge Lane became a place of growing curiosity and quiet fear in the town of Pinebrook. Despite its neat appearance from the outside, a 2-story brick home with a white-trimmed porch and a small garden in front, it now felt different. There was a strange, heavy silence surrounding it. Residents who passed by spoke in whispers, and neighbors began locking their doors earlier than usual. Something about the case didn't feel random. It felt too calculated, too precise. And the house, once just another home on a peaceful street, had become the center of something no one could explain. Investigators returned to the property every day. Forensics had already gone over the obvious areas, the bedrooms, the stairs, the entryways. But now they were looking deeper. One of the lead detectives ordered a full scan of the house using ground-penetrating radar, not because they had reason to believe Hannah was buried there, but because they had nothing else. They needed to rule everything out. It was during one of these deeper searches that a patrol officer made a discovery that shifted the investigation. In the attic, tucked behind a row of dusty boxes and old furniture, was a small pile of crumpled food wrappers and an empty water bottle. The attic had already been inspected briefly, but no one had moved anything around. This time, the officer decided to clear the space thoroughly. Behind an old wooden wardrobe, he found a sleeping bag rolled out on the floor, partially hidden, beneath a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. There was also a flashlight, dead from an old battery, and a tattered paperback novel with a folded cover. These items hadn't been there recently, or at least not when the home was last inspected by the family before Hannah moved in. Suddenly, a chilling idea took root in the minds of the investigators. Someone may have been living in the house before Hannah ever arrived, quietly, secretly, hiding in plain sight. The attic had no direct access other than a pull-down ladder in the hallway. The insulation was poor, and the air was thin and dry, but it was just secluded enough for someone to use it without drawing attention. The presence of food wrappers and personal items made it clear this wasn't some forgotten storage space. Someone had been living up there, possibly for days, weeks, or even longer. When this information was shared with the public, speculation exploded. Pinebrook wasn't a town used to headlines, and the story of a young woman vanishing in her own home while someone may have been living above her became too strange for anyone to ignore. Online theories emerged. Some believed a drifter had snuck into the house before she moved in. Others wondered if the house had a dark history that no one had bothered to mention. The local police department released a statement asking anyone with knowledge of unusual activity around Oak Ridge Lane to come forward. One tip came from an elderly neighbor 2 doors down. She said she remembered seeing the attic light on late at night for several weeks before Hannah moved in. She thought it was strange, but assumed someone was doing repairs. Another man, who lived across the street, reported hearing soft thuds from the roof on some nights, though he couldn't say exactly when or how often. These reports were vague, but together they painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. Someone had access to that house before Hannah ever stepped foot inside it. Hannah had moved into the home after her aunt, Lorraine Marston, passed away from natural causes the previous summer. Lorraine had lived alone in the house for nearly 2 decades, and her death had been sudden but not suspicious. She left no children, and Hannah had been the only remaining relative interested in the property. According to property records, the house had not been visited for over 2 months between Lorraine's death and Hannah's arrival. That gap, investigators now believed, may have been enough time for someone to enter the home and find a place to hide. A second search of the attic revealed more unsettling details. Tucked behind the rafters near the chimney, police found a small tin box containing a few personal items. A photo of a woman with her face scratched out, a torn piece of fabric that appeared to be part of a shirt, and a note scrawled on a torn paper bag. The writing was uneven and hard to read, but one line stood out. She doesn't know yet. Forensics tested the items, but the fingerprints were smudged and incomplete. The fabric didn't match any of Hannah's clothing. With each discovery, the case took a darker turn. The attic wasn't just a hiding spot, it was a lookout. From one corner, a small vent offered a clear view into the upstairs hallway. Someone had likely been watching her, moving quietly when she left for errands or sleep, staying hidden when she was active. It was possible this person had lived in the house undetected for weeks. The idea of a person secretly living inside someone's home wasn't new. Psychologists refer to it as frogging, a rare but real phenomenon where people live in others' homes without their knowledge. Usually, these cases end without violence, but in Hannah's case, the ending was still missing, and so was she. Investigators began digging into the house's history. Before Lorraine Marston, the home had belonged to her late husband Roger, who had passed away in the early 2000s. There was no criminal record associated with the home, no break-ins reported, and no known squatters in the area. But one curious detail emerged. A contractor who had helped renovate the home 10 years earlier had abruptly left the job mid-project. The reason? According to the old project notes, he claimed he felt uncomfortable in the house. He never gave more detail, and his name had faded into forgotten paperwork. Police attempted to track him down, hoping to learn more. While they searched for him, the town's anxiety deepened. Friends of Hannah began organizing candlelight vigils, and online communities started raising awareness, sharing her story across platforms. But even as her photo spread across the internet, even as more people became invested in finding her, no one could answer the central question. Where had she gone? The house remained sealed as a crime scene, guarded day and night, but no further. Physical evidence turned up. The attic had given up its secrets, but none of them led to Hannah. Whoever had lived there was long gone. And the unease that had started with a quiet 3 a.m. phone call now infected the town itself. Everyone wondered the same thing. If someone could live inside a home without being noticed, what else could they do? And how long could they stay hidden? Week after Hannah Collins disappeared, the case took an unexpected turn. Up to that point, investigators had been working without clear direction. No fingerprints, no physical evidence linking anyone to the scene, and no sightings of Hannah. But everything changed when her cousin, Claire Bennett, came forward with something that would shift the investigation's course entirely. Claire had been helping clear out Hannah's storage unit after her disappearance. She had hesitated for days, unsure if she was ready to go through Hannah's personal belongings, but she knew that any small clue could matter. Among the boxes labeled with dates and contents, books, clothes, photographs, Claire found a plain, unmarked journal tucked inside a shoebox. It was leather-bound and slightly worn, filled with Hannah's handwriting. She hadn't mentioned keeping a journal before, but from the first few pages, it was clear Hannah had been writing in it regularly since moving into her aunt's house. The early entries were simple. She described the process of unpacking, adjusting to a slower pace of life in Pinebrook, and rediscovering the house she barely remembered from her childhood. But as Claire flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. The entries from mid-December caught the detective's attention. Hannah had begun to document strange occurrences in the house. Nothing major at first. A glass she didn't remember using was in the sink. A light she swore she turned off was on again when she came downstairs. At first, she wrote it off as stress or forgetfulness. She'd been living alone for the first time in her life, and the house was old. It creaked. It settled. The wind made strange sounds in the trees. But with each passing day, her notes grew more anxious. She started hearing soft noises at night, footsteps above her bedroom. She assumed it was animals in the attic, maybe raccoons or squirrels. She wrote about hearing faint knocks on the walls while she lay in bed, too nervous to get up and check. Then, one night, she heard what she described as a breath, close to her ear. even though she was alone in her room with the door locked. In another entry, she noted that a picture frame on the hallway wall had been turned upside down. She remembered walking past it earlier that day and seeing it upright. No one else had been in the house. The most chilling entry came just a day before she disappeared. Hannah wrote, "Last night, I heard someone whisper my name. I thought I was dreaming at first, but it was too clear. It sounded like it came from the hallway. When I got up to check, nothing was there. I looked everywhere. Doors still locked. Windows shut. I want to believe I'm imagining things, but I'm not so sure anymore. I don't feel alone here. If something happens to me, please don't let it be ignored." The journal was submitted as evidence, and its contents deepened the mystery. Hannah hadn't just vanished. She had been afraid. Her fear hadn't come from the outside. It had grown slowly, inside her own home. It was now more likely than ever that someone had been watching her for weeks, maybe longer. The attic discovery and now the journal both pointed to one terrifying possibility. Hannah had not been alone in that house. Someone may have been living there without her knowledge. Someone may have been moving freely through her space, watching her every move. With renewed urgency, investigators returned to the house. They re-examined the attic and every wall and corner that could possibly hide a passage or space. In doing so, they found something else. In the upstairs hallway, near the ceiling, was a small ventilation grate. It looked ordinary, but when one officer removed it for inspection, he discovered a narrow gap that led behind the wall, a crawl space, barely wide enough for a grown adult. Inside, wedged in the corner of the crawl space, was a spiral notebook. Its cover was black and cracked. The pages inside were strange. There were crude sketches, figures with long arms, houses drawn with shadowed windows, faces with no eyes. There were lists, too, written in shaky handwriting. Times, days, observations. One page listed the words, bedroom light 1047, kitchen 103. She checks door twice. It wasn't Hannah's handwriting. This notebook seemed to belong to whoever had been in the house with her. It wasn't just a hiding place. It was a lookout, a space designed to observe her without being seen. Near the back of the notebook was one phrase written over and over again, in larger and more chaotic handwriting. She knows now. Investigators were shaken. The person who had been living in the walls wasn't just hiding. They were documenting, watching, studying her. And once they realized Hannah had become aware of their presence, something changed. News of the discovery was kept from the public at first. Investigators worried it might attract unwanted attention or spread fear. But the information confirmed what many had suspected. This wasn't just a case of someone going missing. Hannah Collins had been targeted. The question now was who this person could be, and why no one had noticed them for so long. A forensic team was brought in to examine the crawl space and attic more closely. They collected fibers, fingerprints, and anything that could be used to identify the unknown occupant. Meanwhile, the journal continued to provide important context. In earlier entries, Hannah had briefly mentioned that her aunt had always seemed uneasy in the house. She remembered hearing her say strange things as a child, like how she didn't like going upstairs alone, or how the attic didn't feel right. At the time, Hannah had thought it was just an old woman's imagination. But now, those memories took on a darker meaning. Police began looking into the home's entire history, who had visited, who had worked on it, who had access during the years it stood unoccupied. They traced records back nearly 20 years and discovered a former maintenance worker. who had been contracted for repairs several times during the house's earlier years. His name was not familiar to any family member, and he had left Pinebrook a decade ago under unknown circumstances. They ran his name through old databases, only to find something troubling. The man had once been investigated for trespassing and loitering around abandoned buildings. But he had vanished from public records in 2013. No arrests, no taxes, no driver's license renewals, nothing. Detectives now had a theory forming, one that chilled everyone involved. Whoever had been in the house with Hannah wasn't just a stranger who slipped in by chance. He may have had a connection to the home. Long before she ever arrived, the pieces were beginning to fit together, but the biggest one remained missing. Where was Hannah Collins now? And had she discovered the truth too late? The media had begun to lose interest by the time the fourth week passed without any new leads on Hannah Collins. What had once dominated local headlines now shared space with newer stories, and the public's attention started to shift. But inside the Pinebrook Police Department, the urgency remained. The case had taken a disturbing path, and investigators knew that what they were dealing with wasn't ordinary. Hannah hadn't just disappeared. She had vanished inside a house where someone had likely been watching her every move. They had the attic, the crawlspace, the strange notebook, and the journal entries, but none of it led to a body, a confession, or a final answer. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning, a construction crew unearthed something. They were working only 5 blocks away from Oak Ridge Lane, clearing a long-abandoned lot to prepare it for a new development. As they dug into the frozen earth near the edge of a wooded patch, a worker's shovel struck something hard. At first, he thought it was a pipe, but the dull thud didn't sound like metal. When they looked closer, they realized it was a small wooden crate, weathered, old, and sealed shut with rusted nails. Inside the crate was a collection of strange objects. A pair of women's shoes, a charm bracelet, a key ring with an unfamiliar symbol etched into the metal, and a single photograph. The photo showed a teenage girl standing in front of a fireplace. Her face was familiar, and it didn't take long for the detectives to match it to a missing person from 2005. Her name was Marissa Dale. She had disappeared from Pinebrook 20 years earlier, at the age of 17. Her case had gone cold, and was largely forgotten. The crate appeared to be a kind of memorial, an underground shrine, buried far from the original crime scene. What tied it to Hannah's case wasn't just the location or the nature of the items. It was the writing carved into the inside of the wooden lid. She saw me. The phrase matched the same one found in the notebook from Hannah's crawlspace. For investigators, the meaning was clear. Whoever had been inside Hannah's house had done this before. And if they had managed to stay hidden for decades, then it was possible there were other victims. The police immediately launched a full review of all unsolved missing persons cases in the area going back 30 years. Patterns began to emerge. Disappearances of women, mostly young, with no forced entry, no violence reported, and no bodies ever recovered. Each case had faded away over time, brushed aside as runaway theories or unprovable foul play. But now, they all looked different. Each of the women had lived alone, or in places that would have made it easy for someone to hide undetected. Search teams were sent back to Oak Ridge Lane. This time, they weren't just looking in the attic or crawl spaces. They brought ground-penetrating radar to scan the entire property, including the soil around the foundation and the surrounding wooded lots. The quiet, peaceful street was once again filled with flashing lights and investigators in heavy jackets, carrying out equipment, shovels, and sample kits. That same day, while scanning the property, A cadaver dog indicated a spot in the far corner of the backyard. It was near a line of old hedges, overgrown and half dead from winter frost. The team began digging, and within hours they discovered a second, smaller crawl space, this one buried and concealed beneath an old tool shed. It hadn't been part of the official property plans, and was likely constructed illegally long ago. Inside, the space was barely wide enough to crawl into. It was damp, cold, and filled with decaying wood and insulation. But in the corner, hidden, beneath layers of dirt and debris, they found another object, a duffel bag. It was sealed tightly with twine. When investigators opened it, they found clothes matching Hannah's, along with a cell phone that had long since gone dead. The phone was sent to a digital forensics lab. After hours of recovery attempts, they managed to access its last recorded files. What they found stunned everyone involved. There were 6 short video clips, each under a minute long. Hannah had recorded them the week she disappeared, hiding the phone behind a stack of books in her bedroom. In the videos, she didn't speak. The footage was grainy and dark, but it showed something moving in the shadows of her room, brief flashes of a figure slipping past the doorway, or a hand resting on the frame before retreating. One video caught the reflection of a person in her mirror, just standing behind her as she sat at her desk, unaware. In another, the camera picked up the sound of breathing, loud, close, and deliberate. The most terrifying clip was the final one. It was taken around 2:59 a.m., just minutes before her 911 call. The footage showed Hannah sitting on her bed, clearly frightened, looking toward the door. The hallway light flickered, and then something, or someone, moved into the room. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and wore a mask. The camera fell to the floor as the screen turned black. After watching the videos, no one doubted anymore that Hannah had been taken from her own home. The footage was shared only with law enforcement and Hannah's immediate family. It wasn't made public. The investigation now turned into a manhunt. Detectives finally traced the maintenance worker they had identified earlier. His name was Douglas Reeve. After disappearing from official records in 2013, he had been living off the grid, drifting from town to town under different aliases. He had no criminal convictions, but neighbors and landlords described him as quiet, odd, and paranoid. One even mentioned how he always asked about basements and attics when renting rooms. A nationwide alert was issued. Reeve had likely been hiding for years, perfecting the art of moving undetected, embedding himself in homes without being noticed. He was believed to be deeply disturbed, capable of long-term surveillance and manipulation. Despite weeks of effort, Reeve remained missing. But the net was closing. Tips began coming in from people across several states, each claiming to have seen someone matching his description. The last confirmed sighting came from a gas station camera in Ohio, 2 days before Hannah's case, reopened with the duffel bag discovery. In the footage, a man with a large coat and a backpack purchased food and disappeared into the night. Though they hadn't found Hannah, the evidence was now too strong to ignore. She hadn't left voluntarily. She had been watched, stalked, and taken by someone who had likely done this before. And unless they caught him soon, he could do it again. But there was still one final piece left. Something hidden deeper than all the rest. Something waiting to be uncovered. 2 months had passed since Hannah Collins vanished, and though the investigation had advanced, she remained missing. The videos retrieved from her phone, the hidden notebooks, the underground crate, all of it had painted a chilling portrait of someone who was methodical, deliberate, and deeply disturbed. But the most pressing question remained unanswered. Where was she now? Investigators feared the worst. Statistically, the odds of finding someone alive diminished rapidly after the first 48 hours. Yet, something about this case refused to follow any pattern. Then, without warning, something changed. On a quiet Friday morning in early March, an anonymous envelope arrived at the Pine Brook Police Department. It had no return address. It was postmarked from a town 4 hours away, but the name had been smudged. Inside the envelope was a single Polaroid photograph and a slip of paper. The photo showed a wooden chair in the corner of a room, positioned beside a dusty window, with broken blinds. The lighting was dim, but if you looked closely, you could make out the faint outline of someone's arm, bound at the wrist. The paper simply read, "Not finished yet." The envelope triggered an emergency response. Every officer was pulled into the case. The photo was scanned, enhanced, and geolocated based on the lighting and structural features. It wasn't much to go on, but experts managed to narrow it down. The sunlight slant suggested it was taken in a west-facing room in the late afternoon. The window was old, pre-1980s, with distinctive wooden framing not common in modern builds. And there was one small detail that proved vital: a piece of an old calendar pinned to the wall in the background. Though it was blurry, the writing on it appeared to spell out part of a business name: Hensley. Detectives combed through
property records and business listings until they found a match. Hensley Paper Co., an abandoned mill located on the outskirts of a rural town 3.5 hours from Pine Brook.
The factory had been closed for over 15 years. It was surrounded by forest and largely forgotten, but still standing. A SWAT team, local authorities, and FBI agents coordinated a joint operation. They approached the building with caution. There were signs that someone had been there recently: fresh footprints in the mud, discarded food wrappers, and a makeshift path that led into the lower level of the structure. The interior was dark and cold, filled with rotting wood and rusted machinery. The search party moved slowly, clearing room after room. Then they found it. In the far corner of the mill's basement, hidden behind a false wall of crates and tarps, was a small room. Inside, they found a chair matching the one in the photo. The window beside it was broken, with blinds that fluttered weakly in the breeze. And in that room, huddled in a blanket, was Hannah Collins. She was alive, weak, dehydrated, and disoriented, but alive. Medics rushed her to a nearby hospital. She had been held captive for over 8 weeks. During that time, she had been fed irregularly, kept in darkness, and monitored constantly. She couldn't describe her captor clearly. He wore a mask and rarely spoke. She only knew he was methodical. He had set strict routines, timed her meals, and maintained almost complete silence. But the most horrifying detail she shared was this: she was not alone the entire time. During her first week in the mill, she heard another voice. A woman, older, kept somewhere nearby. They never saw each other, but they communicated through the walls, tapping or whispering. The woman told her name was Marissa, and then one day, the voice stopped. Hannah never heard her again. That revelation confirmed a haunting suspicion. Marissa Dale, the teenager who vanished in 2005, had also been kept there. She had likely died in the same building where Hannah was found, her body either removed or hidden beyond reach. The mill was searched again, thoroughly this time, with new urgency. After hours of scanning every inch of the property, they discovered a sealed hatch beneath a broken floorboard. Inside was a narrow tunnel that led to a smaller chamber. It had no windows, no ventilation, and at its center were skeletal remains. A forensic analysis would later confirm the worst. Marissa Dale had died there, possibly years ago. Her cause of death was unclear, but evidence suggested she had been held in captivity just like Hannah. The timeline aligned perfectly with when the strange notebooks first appeared in the Oak Ridge house. Now the manhunt for Douglas Reeve became a national priority. They had a name. They had a location he'd used. They had surviving victims and confirmed deaths. But he was gone. By the time authorities reached the gas station where the photo was mailed, security footage showed him entering the store wearing a cap and sunglasses. He mailed the envelope, bought food, and left. He had vanished again, as he always did, quietly and carefully. The town of Pinebrook would never be the same. Hannah returned home under protective custody, her face gaunt and her eyes distant. She struggled with the trauma, the memories, the darkness. Therapy helped, but she rarely spoke in public. She refused interviews. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to forget. The community held a vigil in Marissa Dale's honor. Her family, long relocated, returned to lay her memory to rest. Her story was no longer just a cold case. It was a tragedy confirmed. One that haunted the woods of Pinebrook for years without notice. As for the Oak Ridge house, it was boarded up permanently. No one wanted to live there again. Some said they still felt watched when passing by it. Others believed more secrets were buried in its walls. It became a local legend, a symbol of everything that had gone unnoticed for too long. Authorities continued the search for Douglas Reeve, issuing bulletins and offering rewards. His face was now on every law enforcement database, but he had learned how to survive in the shadows. Some believed he would never be found. Others believed he was still out there, watching, waiting for his next house, his next hiding place, and, in a final twist, 6 months after Hannah was rescued, another envelope arrived. This time, it was addressed directly to her, sent through a private courier. Inside was a Polaroid of an unfamiliar home. Just a single line was written beneath it. "You're still part of this." No fingerprints, no DNA, no clue where it came from. The case was never closed, because deep down everyone knew it wasn't over.